Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the annual IPCW lecture. My name is Emma Jane Sherry. I have 25 years of working in marketing and communications, helping companies bring their stories to life through clear, human-centric communications. I am currently the head of marketing and communications at the wonderful TCM Group, and I'm totally delighted to be chairing today's annual lecture. It's a real pleasure to be part of International People and Culture Week. It's a week dedicated to spotlighting and pioneering the work of people and culture teams across the world. This year's programme brings together live fireside chats, regional caucuses, and global conversations, exploring the role of people, culture, and leadership, and shaping a fairer, more human, and high-performing workplace. At the heart of this week is a really powerful idea that culture is everybody's business. I can think of no better person than to deliver this year's annual lecture than David Liddle. David, welcome. For those of you that haven't heard of David before, David is the founder and the CEO of the TCM Group, an award-winning consultancy that specialises in mediation, investigations, leadership development and cultural transformation. Over the last 25 years, David has worked with organisations across sectors across the world, helping them to move away from blame, fear, retribution, and towards dialogue, compassion, fairness, and resolution. David is also the founder and the president of the People and Culture Association and one of the leading voices calling for a shift from traditional HR models towards more strategic and values-led function. David is also the editor of The People Leader, a new magazine showcasing great cultures and how organisations can move towards transformational cultures. So David, a lot on your plate. That's a big amount that you're responsible for. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Emma Jane, thank you. I like to keep myself busy, particularly I get excited, EJ, when we're talking about people, culture, leadership and learning. And the work of the People and Culture Institute is just such an inspiration. And what I love about it is it just brings together people from across the globe who share a real passion for fairness, justice, inclusion, sustainability, kindness, compassion. But I think, one of the aspects that I've loved about International People and Culture Week is a recognition that those aren't necessarily just driven by a sort of an ethical or idealistic lens, although treating people well is a moral imperative. But also it's been so powerful this week seeing people describing those principles as drivers of high performance, successful organizations where we flourish and thrive. And in essence, create brilliant organizations, but doing so bringing people with us rather than, almost this sort of intrinsic battle that we've sometimes seen where, there's a risk that we see within our organizations, a fissure, if you will, between the employee, the workforce, the management and the leadership of our organizations. So it's great to be here.
I have to say, it's been an incredible week so far. Like the level of discussion, the quality of discussion, the number of people across the world who have really engaged with this week has just been incredible. So, what a celebration of culture.
Massively. Emma Jane, it's great to be here. Thank you. Thank you to everyone as well who's dialing in live. I believe there's a large number of people dialing in live to listen to this lecture on LinkedIn. So Emma Jane and I are going to have a bit of a conversation today. So the way that the format for the session will be, I'll share some of my thinking behind my book, my latest book, which is called People and Culture. Surprise, surprise. People and Culture, a practical guide for HR and leaders. And what I really enjoyed when I was writing the book and researching the book, which feels it was 12 months or so ago now, was the conversations I had with senior people leaders across organizations across the world who said really kind of with a universal voice that we needed to rethink and reshape the way we think about HR, leadership and management within our organization. So my lecture will be drawing from this book, which is, as the saying goes, available from all good bookstores. So Jonathan, if we can share my screen, I will start sharing, and then EJ, we're going to have some conversations and questions, and we'll pause for breath. It would also be great if there's anything that you're hearing me say during the lecture, or any feedback you've got, or in particular anything that you're doing to make culture everyone's business in your own organisation, to drive the people and culture imperative. Please do share your thoughts, and I may even ask a few questions of you, the audience, as I'm going along today. So today's lecture is called The People and Culture Imperative, and I'm really proud to be here delivering this session today, talking about something which is incredibly close to my heart and a real powerful driver, as I've suggested earlier, of high-performing, successful, brilliant organisations. And goodness me, don't we need that right now? So my background, as Jane alluded to and talked to a moment ago, it comes from the area of mediation and restorative practice. And before I set TCM up 25 years ago, which I can't believe, Jane, it's a quarter of a century. Where did that go? I think I started life with a quiff, and it's kind of it's slowly eroded. But that's probably the one big sign over the 25 years. But I have learned so much about people, culture, and organisations. Prior to setting up the organisation, I ran one of the UK's first charities specialising in non-violence and conflict resolution using mediation and restorative principles. And prior to that, my focus was in the area of race relations and anti-racism, which I got a degree in the late 80s, early 90s. I've written a number of books. My first one, Managing Conflict, published in 2017, really challenged the concept of how we manage conflict at work and shifting it from something we avoid dealing with or overreact or engage in very bureaucratic, often stifling, reductive policies, grievance and discipline. And I offered out in that book a powerful framework with a resolution framework to help resolve issues in the workplace. I realised as well as a mediator over 25 years that working with organisations, when people find themselves in disagreement or conflict or falling out, firstly, is how we manage that becomes a defining feature of the culture of our workplace. In other words, justice and how we deliver justice is the defining feature of our culture. But my experience also is when we handle issues, disagreements and challenges and conflicts and falling outs and change effectively, not only does it resolve, if you like, the underlying issues, we actually generate innovation, creativity, growth and learning. And what I came to understand is those principles are the drivers of successful cultures in our workplaces, truly transformational cultures. So my second book sought to bring all of that together in a blueprint to help organizations shape the kind of cultures where their people could thrive, their teams could flourish, the organization could truly be best in class. My third book, published this January, as I mentioned earlier, People and Culture, really starts to throw down the gauntlet and the challenge to our leaders and people function, which is what role can you play in helping to shape a truly transformational culture in our organizations? And one of the challenges that I'll set out in my lecture today very, very clearly is we can't expect to address the cultural challenges of tomorrow using the systems of yesteryear. My argument is very simple. Those systems and processes, the legacy HR processes, they don't work. They drive people apart. They create confrontation. They're reductive, divisive, harmful, reductive, challenging, and they try to reduce complexity into very simple bite-sized chunks, black and white, win or lose. They don't work. They didn't ever work. And I would suggest they will never work. So this new book says, let's do work differently. Let's think about how we rewire the organization. So I started off by looking at the nature of work. I started to explore the principles of different management and HR methodologies. I looked at unitarism, I looked at radicalism, I looked at postmodernism. I looked at different aspects of our workplace. So started off with the unitarist perspective, thinking about the conflict that exists between the employee and the employer. In some respects, a simpler time. We didn't have multiple stakeholders in our organizations. There was two functions, the employer and the employee. And HR often sat between those two functions, developing rules and systems and processes to manage the relationship, and often a conflictual relationship between the employee and the employer. Think about pluralism, the shift to pluralism, when organizations started to disperse, different voices, different backgrounds, different approaches, difference within our organization became celebrated. And the HR function started to shift and started to develop processes, ED&I being one of those, to help welcome and encourage inclusive, diverse and equitable workplaces in our organizations. But then our organizations began to fragment, certainly post the millennium. We started to see the development of postmodernism, complexity, often chaos, multiple voices and multiple layers of complexity. And it's at this point we start to see the old HR systems fragment and become no longer able to manage in this level of complexity. The systems and processes which were binary were no longer able or fit for purpose in this modern, postmodern period. But we're now moving through postmodernism, and we're starting to see the shift towards a more transformational culture and a transformational relationship in our organizations, leading with values, connecting people together, promoting dialogue and understanding. And whilst the reality of our world, as we can see writ large, is that polemic, belligerent, centralized, autocratic, violent, aggressive leadership models are very much at the foreground of how we all think about leadership. Within our organizations, there is a quiet revolution, a shift towards transformationalism, where we're seeing the focus not on HR processes, but on people and culture orientation and people and culture systems and processes, bringing people together to create positive cultures. We're seeing leadership shifting from centralized command and control leadership towards inclusive leadership, bringing people with us, including all voices, creating spaces for people to talk, to listen, to be heard. Where the leader's role is to serve and support the organization. I often talk about the consumer employee, where a leader's role is to develop the learning, the capability, the mastery or the autonomy and the purpose for our workforce. Where the leader offers vision, clarity, and role models to behaviors is truly transformational. And transformationalism was also defined by a new focus on justice, rejecting the retributive, adversarial, corrosive justice paradigms of the past, delivered often through justice systems which offer a mirage of justice and an illusion of fairness, grievance, bullying, harassment, whistleblowing, discipline, performance, the processes which to me are like cankers in our organization, creating harm and division, trauma, fear, but wrapped up and hidden as some form of risk mitigation system and process. But actually, paradoxically, the systems that are designed to reduce harm and trauma in the organizations are those systems which create the greatest harm and trauma. I remember speaking to a delegate, a participant on a conference I spoke at very recently. It was the Health and Wellbeing Show, and we were talking about policies and processes and the application of those policies and processes. And she said to me very vividly, I remember, I'll never forget what she said to me. She said to me she had breast cancer and she was unable to attend work because she was attending various therapies, and so she was away from work for a period of time, for a sustained period of time. And the organisation took her through a disciplinary procedure and then resulted in her exiting the organisation. And she said very plainly and starkly, there was people now surrounding us in this conference. It was at the end of my talk, so people would come to listen to her speak. And she said very plainly to me and to everyone who was listening that the way that the organisation handled her cancer treatment was worse than having cancer. And how can we ever get to a point in any sense of a meaningful concept of work and describe ourselves as compassionate, modern, progressive HR people, leaders, or leaders in any capacity, and drag people to the gates of hell when things go wrong? That we destroy relationships, we destroy self-esteem, we create this situation where the application of the policy is worse than cancer. So it requires a reset and a rethink. So I encourage you to think about your own culture of your organization. What's the culture like in your own organization? What's it feeling like? How does it feel? What does it look like? And how is it? How you're experiencing it? What 3 words would you use? And if there's one additional word you'd add to those 3, what would you like it to be? And please do share that one word. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what that one word be. What would you like the culture of your organization to become? What's your desired state, your dream state for your culture? And what I love the work in, Emma Jane, and love working in the area of cultural transformation, is we're not fixed. Cultures are not fixed. They're transformational. We can shift them, we can change them, we can evolve them, and we can develop them. But it requires us to take a step up and think about, what do we want our culture to look like? And then what I love about this, and what I'll explore in my lecture, is we can start to deliver meaningful change one conversation at a time, with empathy, kindness, understanding, a desire to empower and support others, to move away from didactic, autocratic, decision-making systems driven by a dynamic of power, authority, control, moving towards the dynamic of mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And it's those conversations which can drive meaningful cultural transformation. So what do you want your culture to look like, and how will you go about bringing that to life for your people? What would that look like? How will you go about doing
I
that?
think
So
that's
please share thoughts and comments. Emma Jane, over to you.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think that is such a powerful sort of place to stop and reflect, David. You know, the how you want to describe the culture that you're living in day to day. You know, it's such an important time to reflect.
Yeah.
Listening back on everything you've just said, it sort of feels like, you know, we're in this situation now where, you know, the HR is almost shaking off the chains of the past, all of those processes and all of the sort of ways of operating that has actually dragged it down and stopped it from really fulfilling its goal, which is to get the best out of the people that work for them. I know the question that you had up previously was about what one word, and I think for me it would be kindness. I think you included that in one of your sort of descriptions as well. But a culture that is based on kindness and compassion is surely one that it's going to get the best out of the people, you know, that support it. So
Massively. I think it's such an important point, because I think sometimes people think of kindness as some kind of a soft option. It's about being nice. And we need to detach the concept of kindness and niceness. Being nice is nice, but being kind can be very challenging. In fact, as a mediator, someone who seeks to bring compassion and empathy and kindness into conversations, I often train at TCM very senior strategic HR leaders, HR managers, business managers, and many, many others. And what I find really curious is when they've going through their mediation skills training or coaching skills training, and they're starting to look at the concept of kindness, what they say to me at the end of the program, and this really is very, very powerful, is they say to me the conversation was far more challenging, far more robust. They were able to give feedback more directly and receive feedback more directly because it was a kind conversation than a conversation that was mired in blame, retribution, finger pointing, or as I call it, Emma Jane, mass tutting exercises, where we go and there's great big tutting and finger pointing. So there's to me, it's very curious that these concepts that sometimes have been called soft skills or concepts which are seen as soft options are actually the options which drive high performance cultures, challenge conversations. And as I said at the very beginning of my lecture, the rationale for doing this is there is a moral imperative of treating people well at work. You know, as I've often said, we borrow people from their families. We need to give them back at the end of the day in good shape. And that's the objective that we have about our workplaces. So there is a moral imperative for us to do so. However, and there is a big however, it's also driving high performance. And as you can see from the slide here, the data's in. You know, this is data from Gallup, and there's such an enormous amount of data that says when we treat people well and create positive workplace cultures, they will show up and do their best work. They're more likely to be engaged. They're more likely to recommend the organisation to the branding. I know you know a lot more than I do about branding. Branding is probably the one thing that boards seek to protect at all costs. And if you look at some of the big brands, they will have such a focus on branding. So the reputation and the brand of the organization is key. So we're going to talk it up. We're going to feel less likely to feel burned out and empty. And I've spoken to people who've been through difficult change processes, mergers, acquisitions, cultural misalignment, and they almost talk about feeling hollowed out. It drains them of their emotion. Yet we're asking them to be innovative and creative and connecting. And no wonder so many cultural alignment programs, mergers and acquisitions fail because of a lack of cultural fit, because people are burnt out and hollowed out. And over 40% of people are less likely to start looking for new work. So if we want to retain the top talent and attract the top talent, let's get culture right. Culture now becomes a key strategic asset within the organization, a key driver of spaces where people want to work and stay. So I was very fortunate with the book. Dave Ulrich, who many I'm sure will be aware of, is the sort of founding father of the modern HR operating model. And although, and Dave knows this, I mean it's self-evident in my book, I'm very critical of that. I think no one's more critical of the traditional HR operating model than Dave Ulrich himself, the founder of said operating model. So when he spoke so highly of my book and talked about the impact that it has and the blueprint that it offers, I was very, very appreciative of that. So Dave, I don't know if you're listening, but if you are listening, Dave Ulrich, I'd like to say a huge thank you to you for your mentorship and inspiration to me and to many, many others over a great many years. So the transformational culture model, which is what I will focus on, is about how do we bring this to life, centers around three core elements. I'm going to spend a lot of time today focusing on these three core elements, but it's broken into three chunks. The first part is the culture hub. This is about driving, sustaining, managing the culture, answering two very, very important questions. Who owns the culture of our organization? And how do we drive and sustain a transformational culture at work? Who owns the culture, and how do we drive the changes that are necessary to make culture happen? The Culture Hub is a multidisciplinary team chaired by the Chief People Officer and the Chief Executive Officer, if possible, to come together to manage that sense of ownership and sustainability. The centre are the 8 enablers. A truly transformational culture. This is the strategic enablers. By the way, Emma Jane and anyone, I mean, I know we talk a lot about culture eating strategy for breakfast. No, it doesn't. Culture and strategy are two sides of the same coin. We cannot have an effective culture without a clear strategy, and our strategy will not work without cultural alignment within our organizations to help support the strategy, provide the scaffolding. So strategy and culture have to coexist. And at the center of the transformational culture model are the 8 strategic enablers to bring culture to life. And at the end of the model, the 7 C's, these are the superpowers that we need to equip our managers with, to give them the tools and the skills, the approaches that they need. I see so many complex capability frameworks, competency frameworks, systems and processes within learning and development and elsewhere in our organizations. Yet I talk to managers who don't have the skills to be curious, to ask the questions, to listen actively, to build rapport, to challenge constructively, to protect relationships, to maintain self-esteem of other, to understand how our brains work and how we're wired and why we might react defensively in some places and occasions, and we may have an open, high growth mindset in others. And unless we give those skills and tools to our managers, it doesn't matter how many competency and capability frameworks we have. We're not equipping them with the right skills they need to manage the workplace of today and the workplaces of tomorrow. So there's a real imperative. Oh, Emma Jane.
Sorry, I was just going to interject there because I think I absolutely love the transformational culture model, and I think it's so powerful. But the part that you said at the beginning about the cultural hub and the fact that it's a sort of cross-functional, cross-disciplined ownership of culture, I think is actually really, really refreshing. I think so often culture is seen as something that maybe the HR team owns, and it's about values, and it's about quite a narrow definition of what culture is. But by suddenly sort of opening up that ownership and saying that everybody is responsible, I think that's quite revolutionary. I don't think many companies think about it in that way now. So my question is going to be sort of, David, how are companies starting to adjust to this, and what is that sort of imperative for change? How is that starting to take shape?
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you know, again, in my book, I'll give there's a few case studies, some really nice case studies, more and more case studies coming to life now, and we're publishing them through the People Leader magazine. But one that's in the latest edition is from the University of West England, where we see the Chief People Officer and the Vice Chancellor, that's the Chief Executive of the University of West England, working hand in glove to shape the culture of the organisation, bringing people with them and creating this real energy and excitement within the organisation towards a shift to a truly transformational culture. Culture is everybody's business. It cannot sit by default within an HR function, or HR either a given culture and they're thinking, well, I didn't really want it, thank you very much, I'll do nothing with it, or they kind of take it by proxy and see themselves as the culture change agents and the culture catalyst. Neither will work. It can only work if it's distributed, where we see culture as being everyone's business, the manager, employee, union, employee representation groups, senior leaders and others. Yes, people tell me all the time the fish rots from the head and leaders are responsible, and I'm going to focus on leadership today. We can't ignore the role that leaders play in our workplaces, nor should we. But it's not about leadership per se. It's about how do we all lead and how do we all play our part in shaping a culture. And one of the things I find really exciting, Emma Jo, is when people develop these internal hubs or centres of excellence. I'm not talking about the old, tired, broken, boring centres of excellence, the ones that we've kind of all seen and that just really run out of steam. I'm talking about very modern and progressive centres of excellence. AI Centre of Excellence, the People and Culture Centre of Excellence, the Culture Hub here. Some really exciting new modern variations on the Centre of Excellence theme. Actually, it's set, and I use the word excitement quite deliberately because it puts a level of excitement into the organisation. Culture now becomes the greatest asset the organisation has, because it helps to generate and engender creativity, learning, insight and growth. And at the heart of that is the people and culture function. I talk about the people and culture function as an oracular function, the oracle of work. No longer, I've just written a very small piece for Joe Burrell's latest research looking at sort of burnout and some of the mental health and other challenges sitting within the HR function. I mean, I run, as you know, EJ, a consultancy. We are overwhelmed with people wanting to come out of HR, burnt out, tired, disillusioned, fed up and frustrated with the way that HR works. And that's HR itself. Imagine the people who are on the receiving end of that. It's a function which has played such an important part through our organizations, but it's a function where there is a significant imperative for change. There's a need for real change. Conflict at work, my first passion, conflict resolution. And what I love about this is conflict is not conflict or culture, it's conflict and culture. Because conflict and how we manage it, as I said earlier, justice is the defining feature of culture. So unresolved conflict costs a whopping £28 billion a year. That's a billion with a B. That's £1,000 per employee in the UK per year. Of that, less than 1% is spent on meaningful dialogue, resolution-oriented approaches. Can someone please tell me where's the other 99% going? It's rhetorical, I think we all know. What a waste of money. Have organisations in the cost of living crisis, austerity 3.0, whatever we're on now, the war in Iran, the cost of living, the implications on our economy, the lack of economic growth, the potential for out of control inflation and interest rate hikes. And this is not just me being negative. This is the harsh reality. Can our organizations afford to just be flushing money down the drain because two people are squabbling in an office and no one's got the basic skills, capability, nor desire to resolve those issues constructively? So they just don't do anything. And then when it doesn't work, they plaster on a grievance procedure and make it 20, 30, 500 times worse because some body called ACAS tells us we have to do it that way. We don't have to do it that way. We can get people talking through mediation and dialogue and resolution methodologies. We've got the UK, we're running some of the most unengaged, disengaged workplaces in the G7 nations, the leading nations in the world. The Office of National Statistics tell us we're ranked 9 out of 12 for productivity in the UK, the real productivity challenge. And I'm not talking about new plant and machinery and investment in that sense. I'm talking about investing in our people to create positive transformational cultures where we can thrive and flourish and become productive. We cannot be productive by applying the old systems of yesteryear. As I said, they don't work, they didn't work, and I'm really sorry to say they sure as heck ain't going to work in the future of work going forward. We need to see a shift, a radical shift. And managers and employees are dealing with these issues all the time, and it's playing out in terms of disagreement of whether it's on a two-party form or indeed within teams and on a collective basis. So I go into boards, I go into HR departments, and you know, not to quote Pete Hegseth, but people are clutching their pearls and wringing their hands, you know. But then I say the question, they can't believe what's going on in their organisations. I do cultural audits, and I say this is the data, this is what we're hearing, and everyone goes, "Gosh, this is terrible. It can't be like this." I say, well, it is. This is what people are saying. This is what people are telling us. This is what people are telling me. I ran a focus group. I sat and listened to people for a day, and they were talking about the disadvantage, the hurt, the harm, the trauma, the disengagement. They're telling me, they're telling us, they're telling you this is what's going on. Where's the strategy, I ask? Where's the strategy for developing this stuff? How are you going to handle these challenges? And repeatedly, I've seen better strategies for ordering paper clips in our workplaces than I have for dealing with these issues. And it's such a shame. It's such a shame when boards and people teams and others skirting around the issues, talking about the issues, worrying about the issues, deeply affected by the issues, as I said earlier. Yet we're not doing anything about it in a meaningful sense. we're not tackling the issues in a meaningful sense, in a way which is going to help to drive the culture, where we recognize that there's a distinct connection between our behaviors in the workplace, our leadership, how behaviors then drive the culture, and then how culture drives performance. And when we start to create a strategic thread that recognizes that leaders shape our behavior defines our culture, and culture drives our performance, then we can start to see there's a direct relationship between these elements: culture, leadership, behavior, performance, creating a strategic link between those. So I'm going to talk now about leadership as a golden thread in the people and culture model. I throw out some questions, just more for reflective prompt, really, and a chance just to take stock and think about leadership and how it lands for you. So think of a leader, someone maybe who changed something for you at some time, or something in you. What was the smallest thing? Not a big thing. I'm not talking about a big restructure or a big pay rise or a bonus scheme or whatever it was. What was the smallest thing that they did that made the biggest difference for you? And how can you make that small thing happen into your own leadership approach? So please share your thoughts, share your reflections, share your ideas. What works for you? What do you see leaders doing? The one thing I hear a lot that leaders do that makes a difference are two very simple words, is thank you, and showing appreciation and being appreciative of another person's efforts and their commitment to helping drive the culture within the organization. I did a podcast recently for a wonderful organization called Thankbox. It's a bit of a shout out to Thankbox and Svetlina at Thankbox who hosted me on the podcast, and we're talking about the importance and the power of appreciation in our workplaces. And when leaders see us, hear us, understand us, and appreciate us, then we can start to connect with our workplace. Then we start to see enhancements in discretionary effort. Then we start to see productivity uplift. Then we start to see performance fly. Thank you. I appreciate you. I understand you. Now we can start to get to work. So what was the biggest thing, the biggest difference, the smallest thing that made the biggest difference that you saw within your own organizations? Another aspect of leadership that I think is worth mentioning in the context of leadership and the challenges that we see with regard to leadership, where leadership feels like it's weaponized, it's used as a tool, as a weapon. We see autocracy, we see leadership hegemony, centralization of power, command and control. We can all see this playing out, and it's beginning to grate, if truth be told, because it's starting to really demonstrate the wrong behaviors that we think about leadership. To me, the best leaders I've ever met don't use their leadership as a weapon or as a system of control or as a tool to undermine others or diminish others. The greatest leaders I see in my life, the greatest leaders I see in the workplaces, in my community, in the work that I do across the piece, those leaders instill and engender leadership in others. And to me, the greatest gift a leader can give is the gift of helping others to become leaders. And to do that, we need to shift the mindset, because if I give my leadership to others, they may gain a competitive advantage over me. So I need to readopt my thinking that leadership is not about gaining competitive advantage. Leading is about helping to shift and drive the culture of our organizations that then drive brilliance, performance, flourishing, thriving spaces for us all to grow. So leadership becomes egalitarian, it becomes distributed. It becomes shared across the organization, and that I am not threatened by your leadership. I welcome and encourage, nurture and support your leadership. And that's the true test of leadership. That's true servant leadership, in my opinion. And when we can start to see that achieved, and we do see that in so many organizations, we start to see a real shift in the way that we think about the concept of leadership and management, moving from command and control and hierarchy. So what do you think? What are you seeing in your own organizations? Are you seeing leaders embracing the concept of servant leadership and transformational leadership? Are we seeing a flattening of the hierarchy, or do you still see leadership centralized? Do you still see autocracy and command and control leadership? If you see that, what are the implications? What impact does it have on your organization? And when you see the leadership pyramid inverted and you see these leaders serving and supporting and nurturing and fostering positive climate and team culture. What impact does that have in your organization? Please do share your thoughts. Please do share your ideas. Then the final point really I wanted to make here is going back to the 7 C's. These become the superpowers. These are the superpowers. Courage, the ability to listen, to challenge, to be challenged, to connect emotionally with values, to connect and understand the other person's values and beliefs, to seek areas of convergence rather than focusing purely on areas of divergence, looking at what, in simple terms, what brings us together, what holds us together, rather than what drives us apart. In a world which is polarizing and binary, the opportunity to find things that connect us as human beings is such an important function of leadership, to build collaboration through connection, to create a sense of shared purpose, alignment of the needs and motivations of the workforce with the needs and motivations of the employer. And who better to support that than the people culture function? Communication with clarity, to seek to understand another person's feelings, their emotions, their needs, their goals before making decisions, to seek to understand, to truly understand, to understand another person's perspective and put myself in another person's shoes. It helps me to make better decisions. It helps leaders to make better decisions, to lead with compassion and to be curious, to ask why, to understand, to seek to ask questions before, to show, not to tell. These are the superpowers of modern, progressive, powerful, truly transformational people first leadership. So I encourage you to think about what are the superpowers that you bring to your own organization and how can you bring more of these to life in the work that you're doing. And ultimately, thinking about the role of the leader. I see you. You're no longer invisible. You're not a utility. You're not a resource. We're not human resources. We're human beings. We're not an asset to be depreciated on the balance sheet. We're not an asset. We're not a resource. We're not a utility. We're people. We're human beings. I see you as a human being. I hear you as a human being. I understand your needs as a human being. I appreciate your commitment as a human being in the workplace. That's where we start to see the people and culture imperative come to life, which is the next section of my lecture. But I'll pause there, Emma-Jane, and just come back and see if there's any questions or thoughts or anything that you'd like to check in before we move into the people and culture. The future of HR is people and culture, I shall declare.
If anybody has got any questions at all for David, please feel free to pop them in the chat and I will interject and ask them. David, just listening to that, I think it is so, so powerful. I see you, I hear you, I understand you, I appreciate you. And definitely reflecting back on leaders who have had the biggest impact on me in my career, it is really those people who have spent the time to get to know me, who have spent the time to connect with me, and who sort of genuinely understand and appreciate what I do. I think, that idea of gratitude and that idea of being able to express sort of that understanding and that gratitude, that appreciation to people is just so, so important. So I couldn't agree more. We're having some lovely comments in the chat, people saying they're loving this content so far. It's so it's really inspiring. So some really great comments coming in. I'll hand back over to you to talk about the future of HR. I think we're all looking forward to hearing more about that.
Amazing, thank you. I mean, I think that's just, again, talking through a lens of conflict, and just back to the point you were making a moment ago, EJ, around leadership. So if I'm feeling threatened or anxious, or this is where I think leadership and a bit of basic neuroscience can be really, really helpful. These are not soft skills. If I feel threatened or attacked or undermined or humiliated or betrayed or whatever, those negative feelings, we've all felt them at one time or another. That fires off the amygdala, it senses danger, and we fill our body with adrenaline and cortisol. And that's just kind of a natural reaction to and we talk about the fight or flight response. We get into this sort of fight or flight response, which is a very heightened response, a very tiring response. And people who experience it for even short periods have a physical and psychological reaction. When it's sustained over a long time, when it's sustained, it can have a very negative adverse impact in terms of our health, mental health, and also physical health, whether it's irritable bowel syndrome, flare-up of eczema, back, shoulders, and so on and so forth. So I see you, I hear you, I understand you, I appreciate you. We're moving away from the amygdala response to drive cortisol and adrenaline, and we're starting to see little bits of release of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. We just feel good. Shoulders come back, we feel a bit better, I feel heard. That's not just something, that's a physical and a chemical reaction to that positive response, you're more likely, therefore, to have a high growth mindset. And I talked earlier about this is not a moral or ethical or ideological crusade. It is, but it's not. I can perform better when I feel better. I can perform better when I feel happier. I can perform better when I'm not running around wanting to hide from you because I can hear you coming down the corridors. I remember doing some work with in a theatre, surgical theatre, and it was a surgeon and an anaesthetist, and the anaesthetist described it. Sorry if anyone's having their lunch or they're eating just now, but she described that she was literally physically sick. She vomited when she thought about going into theatre to meet the surgeon who persistently and chronically engaged in civil and unacceptable behaviour in theatre. People vomiting before they go into workplace. What kind of workplaces are we creating for our people where someone wants to physically vomit or has to physically vomit before they go into work? That is the current paradigm that so many people work in. If you don't believe me, go and speak to people. Go and speak to the person who submitted a grievance today. Go and give them a jolly good listening to. Go and speak to someone who's just gone through a disciplinary procedures. Go and speak to someone who was made redundant yesterday. Go and speak to someone who's on a performance improvement plan, or speak to a manager who doesn't feel they've been given the skills and tools they need to do their job effectively. Go and speak to a customer who had a grumpy call with, or engagement with someone in one of your telesales teams. Go and speak to people and go and listen to what they're telling you. I've heard them. I've listened to them. That's how we've got to this point, because they are saying that the systems and processes of the past didn't work. They don't work. They will never work. The future of HR is people and culture. We need to reshift the mindset. This isn't a branding exercise. This isn't about papering over the cracks of a broken system. The legacy HR system served a fundamentally important purpose during the unitarist and pluralist principles of work. I would argue that they started to fail and unravel during postmodernism, post the new millennium, and they're most definitely not fit for work in a transformational space. There is nothing about HR systems and processes that I could apply to use the word transformational. They're reductive, binary, divisive, adversarial, corrosive, often seeking to pitch people against each other. That is not transformation. That's risk mitigation, which worsens harm, trauma, distress, fear, and a lack of productivity. As I said earlier, the antithesis of a high-performing organisation is someone going through a performance improvement plan at the moment. So people and culture shift in the dial. What an exciting shift, moving away from humans as resources or humans as utilities or humans as assets to people and culture as a thriving core function in our organisation. So the people and culture function isn't just a rename of an HR team, it's a reimagining of what it means to be a human resources professional, putting people before policy. We don't need all of these policies and processes. One of the areas I'll discuss shortly is the integrated people policy, putting together several policies under one roof and creating a new decision-making system called a resolution index. So rather than having lots of different policies and never know which one to actually use, putting them all together and creating a decision-making system within those. It's proactive. It's actively moving into problems before they become formal or entrenched or they begin to escalate. Seeking problems before they occur, coaching, mindset, mediation, dialogue building, and truly transformational, seeking to bring people together to resolve issues rather than transactional, who's right, who's wrong, who wins, who loses, who defends, who attacks. They're co-creating the culture of our organisation, not seeking to hold it as on their own. They're sharing it as a gift across the organisation. Creating the justice model that I've talked about, transformative justice, no longer retributive, rejecting retribution, blame and punishment as the primary justice paradigm. It just doesn't work. They bring modern capabilities, empathy, dialogue. I mean, these are not tough capabilities. I mean, to some extent they are, but negotiation to identify win-win outcomes, to listen for meaning, to hear what people are saying. All of these principles are core principles embedded in the people and culture skill matrix. Moving away from HR business partner, people are the business. We've already established that. So people partner, not a business partner. People are the business. But we can't just apply the word people partner. You cannot be a people partner and have a grievance procedure. It just, those two things cannot operate. It's one of Newton's laws of physics. You cannot be a people partner and have a grievance procedure, because the grievance procedure is the antithesis of a people first approach. So people partner, the language is changing, but also the whole mindset, behavior, language changes that then drives the cultural transformation. Truly engaged, truly collaborative, widely trusted. Going to HR is no longer seen as a threat. I'm going to go to HR and have a go and tell tales on you in our office as a threat. You know, when did HR become a threat? When did you become a sword of Damocles hanging above people's heads? Going to HR or the people and culture function should be the greatest gift we can give to others. So it becomes strategically one of the most important functions in our workplaces. So how and why does it happen? So how does it happen? So the people and culture operating model is the model that I set out in my book. So people and culture focuses around 5 different domains: people, culture, strategy, and justice. And then delivering core values: people, culture, strategy, and justice. What I'd like to do now is to focus in on those 5 domains of the people and culture operating model. So the people function co-creates a person-centered workplace where values and purpose align. So how do we do it? So the first thing is to create the cross-functional culture hub that we were talking about a moment ago, Emma Jane, bringing people together to align the corporate and the people strategies in our organizations. Investing in the leadership and management capabilities that I was talking about earlier, that align the strategic objectives, the purpose, the values, and the cultural aspirations of the business. I talked earlier was, what do you want your culture to look like? How do we create that alignment? Reimagining the employee handbook, less about process and more about people experience. Aligning job design, recruitment, onboarding, and talent development processes at work with the core values and purpose of the organization. We can have two. We can have compliance and compassion. We can have empathy and accountability. We can have tough and tender processes. And those people first organizations manage to get this right. They're aligning the needs of the employee with the needs of the customer and creating the spaces where values, behaviors, and capabilities come to life in our organizations.
I think that's so powerful, David.
First one on the people lens, the people domain.
I think that is so powerful. Particularly, I love the point about the customer experience and the employee experience and aligning the two. I know, from companies that I've worked in, I used to work at Virgin Atlantic for a while, and there was a huge focus on trying to align those two experiences. Can you share a bit more about that? Is there anything else, any more insight you can give there on the importance?
Yeah, so I think, certainly it's anything where you're kind of putting people at the forefront of the mind, and how do we create the people first approach? So if we approach work through the lens, particularly in the HR process, and I kind of, I've worked with many organizations where it's unfortunate but true, is we started to see our employees as a risk, and we start to manage those employees as a risk, and the workforce is seen as a risk. And HR systems have been designed to mitigate risk and to reduce the risk of the employee against the employer, risk of litigation or an adverse outcome in the tribunal. And of course, if you manage people as though they're a risk, paradoxically, they become the risk that you worry about them being. But also, if you manage people as a risk, you've kind of only really got one tool in your toolbox, which is a hammer. And people aren't nails, Emma Jane. People are people. They don't want to be hit over the head constantly with a hammer. So the people first approach to policy development, systems design, processes within our organizations requires a much wider range of tools. And I've suggested what some of those are, but they're often about listening, engaging, understanding, kindness as a powerful tool, a management tool, as an enabler of those positive workplace conversations.
Amazing. So would you be able to talk to us a little bit more then about sort of the cultural domain of this model?
Of course. Thanks, EJ, for teeing me up so nicely there. So absolutely. So culture is about building transformational cultures which are fair and just, inclusive, sustainable, and high performing. So transformational culture is a place where our people leaders align purpose, strategy, values, capabilities, behaviors, and outcomes. And it's underpinned by the principles of fairness and justice, inclusion, kindness, sustainability. And this alignment creates the conditions for an enhanced people experience, leading to improved performance. And I shared earlier the people and culture, the transformational culture model that I created for the book Transformational Culture. And I'm going to go through it in a bit more detail in a moment and just share some of the thoughts and some of the strategic enablers that people can be using. But we'll come back to the Culture Hub. I just want to kind of spend a few moments really reinforcing the importance of this. It doesn't matter whether you're a small startup, a large global blue chip, and not-for-profit or a public sector organization. Bringing people together, whether it's the chief people officer and the chief executive officer, or a whole team of people from across the organization to co-create a transformational culture. It's chaired by the CPO, the chief people officer, in partnership with the chief executive. It works across the organization. It's collaborative, it's inclusive, and it's fleet of foot. It's able to change. It's not static and fixed. And it shapes the strategic narrative, the way that we think about culture in our organizations. And when I was interviewing people for the book, chief people officers, Karen Tattersfield, who was formerly at Grey in London, she's now on the front cover of the latest edition of the People Leader magazine. She talks very powerfully about these important attributes and elements of getting culture right, and the Culture Hub, the culture work that she's doing is bringing people together and centered around kindness and clarity and respect, and recognizing that they're not soft skills. She sees those and works to bring other leaders with her to see them as the core strategy of the organization. People are partners within organization. They're not problems. And one of the real challenges that I see in so many organizations is people are treated as the problem. But no, people are the solution. And if we engage and harness their true power, then we're able to create truly, truly transformational cultures which underpin productivity and performance. The next domain is the strategy domain. And this is where we come together to craft and shape a strategic narrative which is inspiring, unifying, and evidence-based. So this is where the chief people officer, the HR function, and the leadership function come together to ensure that the people plan and the strategic plan, the corporate strategy, coexist and align. And as Philippa O'Connor told me when I was writing the book and researching my book, it's in that space, she told me, where people priorities become commercial priorities. And I thought that was so powerful. And when culture and strategy truly align, she said that for her organization at PwC UK and elsewhere, extraordinary outcomes follow. So how do we go about doing it? Well, these are the 8 enablers that sit within the transformational culture model. I run through these quickly, Emma Jane, and just provide a bit of an insight. And if people are interested in reading more, let me know, ask any questions. And of course, this is set out in my book, my latest book, People and Culture, a practical guide for HR and leaders. So the starting point is about how do we bring our purpose and values to life in our organization. And the best advice I can give to anyone who wants to get started here is take all of the different touch points between the organization and the employee: job design, job packs, recruitment processes, contracts of employment, onboarding processes, reward benefit systems, policies, processes, procedures, the employee handbook. And just firstly, check, where does the purpose and values of your organization show up? Are they clearly set out and running as a golden thread through every aspect of your employee experience? And if not, then create the space to be able to go away and make the changes that you need. So your purpose and your values are showing up at every single touch point between you and your people. The second one is about gathering data and evidence. And this is where the Culture Hub can be so powerful. What are people saying? Emma Jane, you know a lot about storytelling. What are the stories that people are telling? How are they feeling? How are they showing up? Are we listening to them? Not just the qualitative data, but what's the quantitative data? The people function sat on so much data: engagement, productivity, performance, attrition, putting all of that data together to create a culture dashboard. And that culture dashboard feeds in to the people, to the People and Culture Hub. Transitioning from a HR function to a people and culture function, you'll never look back. Not just a rebrand, or, as I said earlier, sticking paper over cracks. It's about reimagining what it means to be a people leader in our organization, where our leaders listen, where our leaders seek to include, to transform, and to serve those in our organizations. I've talked a lot about integrative leadership already. and they become the ambassadors, if you will, of the purpose and values in our organization, demonstrated through their behaviors, role modeling the behaviors, connecting the workforce, seeking to understand, I see you, I hear you, I understand you, I appreciate you, becomes the mantra of the integrative leader. They recognize that punitive, sanctions-based, blame-oriented mass tutting exercises do not a successful culture create. So shifting the focus from blame and retribution to transformative, repairing harm, creating dialogue, and creating spaces for people to resolve issues constructively is a true sense of a powerful culture. It's the centerpiece of a transformational culture. A culture where well-being, engagement, and inclusion are aligned, not as separate channels that people are swimming down in the ED&I and well-being and wellness and employee engagement, connected as a single strategic narrative, well-being, engagement, and inclusion, feeding into the employee experience in our workplaces. We can't ignore the impact we're having on our planet. I know there's obviously a big conversation going on about fossil fuels with the war in Iran, but it feels like the ESG agenda slipped back a bit, and we're not talking about or thinking about sustainability as much as we should. But the world's getting hotter every day, and the impact on our planet, the impact we're all having on our planet, is something we can't ignore and nor able to ignore. So building in sustainability and social justice into our organizations, what is the impact of our organizations on the society within it which it works? Does it have a positive net positive impact on our society, or does it have a net negative impact? We need to consider the impact, not just of the internal culture, but the impact that the culture has externally. And the bit that we see many strategic leaders really kind of waking up to and locking into is when we start to see culture as a positive expression of the brand values, of the reputation, and minimizing, reducing risk. So this is a big conversation for organizations to think about culture, brand values, building a strong reputation, and mitigating and reducing risk. And how do we go about doing that? I'll stop there for a second, EJ, and just see if there's any questions or thoughts as I begin to wrap up my session and begin to conclude.
There's so much here, David, and I've got so many pages of notes that I've taken from this session. One of our participants today has said, the fact that culture doesn't eat strategy for breakfast, but they are two sides of the same coin. That's amazing, and that's really resonated with them. So that's a great comment we've had through. I just think there's just so much in what you've said so far. So the damage that sort of this historical, blame-driven, rigid, risk-adverse HR systems have caused. The comment that you said earlier about the individual who actually the response from work was worse than the cancer that they were suffering. I mean, that in itself is like, that's something that's really going to stay with me. That, the importance of leadership, and then really how you can take some of these models and practically implement it into your business. I think there's just so much here for thought and reflection. I suppose one of the questions I have is, if somebody is looking at all of this and thinking, I'm an HR director and I'm desperately trying to change the culture in my business, and I really want to, I love everything that you're talking about today. What are some of the, one or two practical next steps that you would recommend people take to do that?
I think the first one does link me into justice, although I think doing I run, with the team, we run really exciting, we call them culture and leadership alignment labs. And the labs are a really powerful way of gathering data and playing the data back into the leadership team of an organization to help think about driving the cultural shift within the organization. And what I love about those labs is they're very pragmatic, and they're centered around small practical steps the organization can have. So my first answer to the question, Emma Jane, is data and evidence. Is how do you bring this to life and understand what's really happening, and those labs can be a great way of doing that. Another one, EJ, if you want to go for the radical, I'm going to give you the radical answer now, is rip up your grievance process. And whilst we get over the kind of shock of what the world would look like without a grievance procedure, what it does is it forces us to rethink the justice paradigm in our workplace, because the grievance procedure is the antithesis of a justice paradigm. It is so destructive, so harmful, and so corrosive. So shifting towards a new justice model and ripping up the old ones, and I mean shredding them, I mean literally shredding them, Because once we've shredded them, we have to ask ourselves some new questions. Firstly, of course, is how do we remain legally compliant? You know, this isn't anarchism, it's a state of anarchy. But it's also about how do we ensure that we create the conditions for our people to thrive and flourish when there's disagreements, conflicts, tensions, quarrels, fights, falling outs, feuds, bullying, harassment, and so on and so forth. Because the existing system creeps around our organization like a thief in the night, making away with all the goodwill that we built up, all of the discretionary effort, all of the hopes and motivations that we bring into work are robbed. They're robbed from us when these processes occur. So the next one is to take a step and shift the dial on the processes. And one of the tools that I like to share with organizations is a very simple one. Take a red pen and mark all of the parts of your discipline and grievance process, which are about blame and sanction, and they're not about, they're about mistrust and fear and anger and upset and division and infantilizing people. They're all behaving like children. Mark with a green pen all of the bits which are about trust and safety and dialogue, empowerment, empathy, learning, growth. And if you've got a couple of dots of green pen, then you're doing really, really well. Now, a good policy, a good resolution framework, as I like to call it, should have an equal balance of green and red. So take your policy and with a green pen and a red pen, and if your policy is all red, it will explain why your organization is running hot. It should be balanced in equilibrium between green and red. So the resolution framework is transformative. It's about bringing together key policies under one roof, an integrated people policy, improving the way that we make decisions to resolve issues in our workplaces, embedding transformative justice, just like Next did here. Next, a wonderful organization. People will recognize Next as a major retailer, one of the most successful retailers on the British high street. And when they embedded the resolution framework within Next, they really did not look back. And what they were saying is it really aligned with the needs of our business and the needs of our managers. And it really changed the way that managers dealt with issues at an early stage, giving them the confidence and the competence to deal with issues. And Emma Jane, we give it away for free. So if anyone wants to rethink today, to answer your question, rip up the grievance procedure, create a culture hub, do a bit of evidence-based. We can come in and do some work with you through a cultural leadership alignment lab. We'd love to do that. And then request a copy of your resolution framework. I guarantee you'll never look back. And one of the barriers to HR embracing the people and culture imperative, in my experience, has been a fear of risk, opening up the organisation to risk. And through the People and Culture Institute, we've been undertaking research into the impact and efficacy of the resolution framework. And of the 1,500 organisations who've adopted the resolution framework in one form or another, not one organisation, not one single organisation has reported an adverse outcome through the employment tribunals. Knowing my clients that I work with and the amount of money I indicated earlier that's spent on conflict, I'm pretty confident, notwithstanding the research, that had the resolution approach caused risk of adverse outcome in the tribunals, I would have been the first to hear about it from organisations where it's created harm. Not one single organisation has had an adverse outcome in the tribunal because they adopted a new approach. And one final tool I'll share, EJ, is the Culture Doctor. This is an AI companion that I've built, which helps organizations take those first tentative steps towards building a truly transformational culture. And much like we do at TCM, we're so excited to share this with people. We provide this free of charge to organizations, and we're there to support you. But that includes so much information to help build a truly transformational culture in your organization and take full advantage of the people and culture operating model and support the transition from a legacy HR system into a modern, progressive people and culture function to drive the people and culture imperative in our workplaces. If you want to, and again, Emma Jane, just to say, even want to guess, Emma Jane, how much this costs. This is
I couldn't possibly guess. High quality magazine. It's gonna be a bit.
There's AIs. I think as our marketing communication head of marketing communication, we'll have to sit down and look at our pricing policy, Emma Jane. But this also is free, and the People Leader magazine is one of my proudest achievements in my 25-year career. It really is a phenomenal, high production value magazine telling stories of people leaders from across the globe. You can see John Slade from the CEO there, Joyce Idinaboye from Oxfam, the Chief People Officer, and the latest edition with Karen Tattersfield, who I mentioned earlier, there from Game Theory previously from Gray. So you can subscribe for free at the People Leader, and we have a People Leader Summit coming online on the 20th of May, where we're discussing some of this in more detail in a really big conversation. I've got 4 or 5 CEOs and CPOs signed up who are going to be part of that big conversation. So Emma Jane, I'll stop there. That's been my inaugural lecture for the International People and Culture Week 2026. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm really happy to answer any questions, and these are big topics of our time, and I'm really happy to carry on the conversation on LinkedIn or anywhere else for that matter, whether people are listening to this on demand or live. Emma Jane, back to you.
David, thank you so much. I mean, there has been so much that we have covered there. It has been incredible. I think that people and culture operating model, for me, I mean, it just gives such a clear framework for how business leaders can really review how they're working today and really start to sort of think about how they make changes. And I love the fact that you finish with the people leader, because for me, I think if for those of you on the call, if you go on, have a look at the people sort of leader publications, what it does is it gives you those practical day-to-day examples of how leaders are really starting to drive transformational culture, how they're looking at people, how they're looking at culture, what they're doing around strategy, how they're trying to introduce that sort of restorative justice into their organizations. It really helps pull everything that you've talked about together. So I think that is a really great place for people to go next. And also, the Culture Doctor, I think, is, an exceptional free tool. So again, thank you so much for sharing that. We've had a couple of questions in on the chat. One of the questions was around the sort of justice, so around that discipline and grievance procedure. I think to me it looks like that's a really nice starting point when people are sort of looking at their culture, being able to sort of take a sort of red pen and really think about it. You mentioned the resolution framework. Do you want to say a few more words about how people can get access to that, if that's a place they want to start to investigate more?
No, absolutely. So the resolution framework, so discipline and grievance. If I start with discipline and grievances, I've kind of given my analysis of those and the impact. They provide a mirage of justice and an illusion of fairness. And really, if for any organisation that wants to apply a people-first approach, they are the complete polar opposite of that. And so, as I say to many people leaders, there aren't many things where you have to make a choice. Generally, you can have, it's not either or, it's and both. But it has to be either people first or discipline and grievance. It can't be, you can't be both. Generally, it's and both, but in this case, it's either or. So if we're going to be dead serious about applying a people first, people and culture imperative, it has to be, we have to rethink the justice model. So the discipline, so within the BBC, within Next, I mentioned earlier, Aviva, big organizations, big global organizations, they're adopting the resolution framework. And what they're doing is they're replacing their discipline and grievance procedure with one single integrated people policy. And rather than submitting a grievance, you submit a request for resolution. There's a lot of effort made beforehand to try and resolve issues constructively at local resolution. So imagine a lot of support is given to managers and people partners, coaching skills, mediation, dialogue building, awareness, negotiation, change management, positive psychology, all of the things I've been talking about today, principled negotiation, getting to yes, those amazing skills. But of course, not everything can be resolved in the line, as we know. So sometimes we need a bit of extra help just to help resolve it. So the request for resolution, you're already shifting mindset and language. I was not taking out a grievance and pursuing a disciplinary procedure. So we're already reducing harm and trauma by shifting the language. It goes into a resolution center, and the resolution center uses objective criteria called a resolution index. A couple of examples: severity, complexity, the needs of the parties, and the risk of the situation are some of the indices against which it's scored. And using the objective scoring system, then the most appropriate route to resolution is identified in each case. In essence, each case has a solution tailor-built around it. No longer are we just going through 3 steps and hoping that one of those steps will resolve it. We're now tailor-building a solution based on the needs and the circumstances of each individual case. Over 90% of those cases will result in a resolution through some form of a of a dialogue process. And only in the most serious cases would you then pursue a formal investigative route, sanctions-based route. And even in those cases, there's a focus on restorative. What I mean by restorative is reducing harm and repairing relationships. So even in the serious and complex cases, so discrimination, fraud, gross misconduct and serious misconduct, which might result in a dismissal, which is possible within the resolution framework. A resolution could mean dismissal as much as it does a more constructive resolution. But even in those cases, it's done in a more human and humane way. I've created an explainer video, actually, Imogen. I didn't mention it, but if people want to go to find out more, it's on resolutionframework.com. Watch a little video of how it works and explains it. And as I said, people can access a free copy of it. And one thing I can say for certain is you'll never look back. Once you've got it in your workplace, you'll be like, why did we ever have these draconian, destructive, harmful processes? And some people tell me, well, we don't really use them. We don't have many grievances or disciplinary cases. But then they also follow up with it, which is, I think people are afraid of them. They're scared of using them and they don't use them. And my argument is they're there. They should be used every day because they're there to help resolve issues. They shouldn't be subject to, they shouldn't be escalatory or weaponized. They should be processes we just use to help have what I would call, or what I think we call at TCM, a quality conversation.
Amazing, thank you. That's really, really helpful. I'm conscious of time. If anybody who's listening has got any more questions, feel free to reach out to David or myself, and we will make sure that you get the answers to those. David, thank you so much. That has been just an exceptional sort of hour's time. I've really, really like so much insight there. And as I said, I've got pages of notes, and I'm sure everybody else who's been listening has as well. A couple of final things. We would love for everybody listening to join the People and Culture Institute. The details for how to join will be coming up on the screen shortly. So please, please, please join. We would love for you to be part of the conversation and continue to sort of join these types of events. You can follow us on LinkedIn to watch more live sessions, video casts, book club sessions. There is so much content from International People and Culture Week, and the quality of discussion has just been phenomenal. So if you've not had a chance to watch all of those sessions, please do, go in, dive in, take the time to sort of see what other people are saying in this space. But finally, I think the final note is just a big thank you. Thank you to everybody who's joined today. Thank you once again, David. We really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
You are very welcome. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And happy International People and Culture Week.
Yeah. Happy International People and Culture Week. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma Jane. Bye-bye, everyone.